Drums of War, Chapter 44, Part 1, Rendezvous. In a parking orbit over a Zod, the Robin Williams was the odd girl out for a flag vessel. A light cruiser, some might even call her a frigate. Not ideal for a formation's flag officer security in some people's estimation. Sergeant Linus George was not one of those people. He knew full well that speed was the most important factor in the Second Star Rapid Response Group's success. He knew so well because they were the ships responsible for putting the Lost Boys on dirt where they needed to be. So really, in a formation of nearly exclusively destroyer-class vessels, a light cruiser was a perfectly good flagship in any of the Lost Boys' estimation. Besides, she had plenty of room aboard her for all the officers of the division and all the officers of the RRG, and even had a little extra room for NCOs and officers from outside the formations, both R&I and Navy. In Sergeant George's humble opinion, she was the best ship in the fleet for a conference, and not the least of these reasons was that while she had plenty of room for conferring, she did not have enough room for lodging. He would be back on the Tiger Lily to bunk down in his own berth. Even with all of those excellent reasons to love the Robin Williams, he still had a deeper, more personal bias towards her. His father's posting was between her bulkheads. It had been over a year since he'd seen Major Eric George outside of his official capacity as the divisional commander. He was looking forward to shaking the old man's hand and sharing news of a required beer. Not so much the news that needed sharing, but that was a separate thing. A trooper took his pleasure where he could find them, whether they came with pain and sorrow or not. He was looking forward to seeing his big brother even less, Captain Jonathan George, and he was going to have words, unpleasant, necessary words. It was, therefore, understandably disappointing when he found Captain George before the General. There was no sense in putting off the inevitable, so he walked right up to where his last living older brother stood among a knot of other butterbars, giving them advice on how to not be idiots in his duty uniform, with his shiny new silver pips on his collar, and tapped the man on his shoulder. "Square up," he said in a hard, flat voice. Hard and flat, like a hammer. The second lieutenant's jaws dropped and the eyes popped out of their skulls as Sergeant George stepped back and dropped into a fighting stance as his older brother turned to glare at him. "Linus, what the fuck do you think?" he started to say. Sergeant George eloquently pasted his older brother's nose with 4 knuckles. "I said square up and great," he snarled. "You and I have words to say to one another." Captain George fell into a fighting stance and snapped a kick at his little brother's knee while snapping at him. "You have no right to call me that, you little shit." Sergeant George stepped into the kick and caught it at the knee with his left hand, and sank his right fist into the captain's kidney. "The fuck I don't!" he fairly roared before driving his forehead into his brother's already bloody nose. A year, you go fucking dark." Captain George wasn't going to just stand there and politely take a beating, especially not from little Linus. No, he shifted his weight and hooded the captured leg around the sergeant's body so that they both tumbled to the deck. Then he seized his brother by the ear and punched his brother in the mouth. "It's not good for goddamn business." This was familiar to the captain. All growing up, Linus had never beaten him in either a sparring match or a real fight. Except Sergeant George wasn't a kid anymore. He drove his knee into Captain George's belly and put his knuckles in his throat hard enough to force the large man to flop off of him to the deck. He gasped and held, "You made Mom cry. Of course it's my fucking business." Captain George dropped the punch he was preparing to throw even as he gasped and choked for breath through his bruised throat and looked away. "Shut up! You don't get it." Then before Sergeant George could further explain just what an arsehole his big brother had been via a few more bruises, the shadow of the colonel fell over them. "On your feet," the man snapped. The brothers scrambled to their feet and stood at attention while snapping off a salute. Sergeant George noted that his ribbons did not include the one denoting belonging to or having belonged to the Lost Boys. But a court-martial wouldn't see his career completely ended. The fact that he declared his intent and given fair chance for defense would go a long way. The fact that he didn't wait for his older brother to accept the challenge before getting started would be a sticking point. The colonel's eyes flicked up and down twice, snapped to the ribbon block on the other, went widened with surprise, then to name tags, all before narrowing to the officerish anger. The brothers could see a loud and lengthy public reaming building behind the colonel's eyes. It began, Just when in the name of merry fuck did the corridors of the Republican naval vessel become a place for family squabbles? I don't give a fuck which one of you idiots threw first. You should both be busted back to privates and put on fucking broom patrol for the next 10 years. Both of you morons should know better. But maybe because since you're a couple of daddy's precious projects, you never got the idea of discipline through your thick fucking skulls. Well, now I'll skull fuck you with that fucking discipline, so maybe it'll stick in what little brains you managed to scrape together between you. A familiar, steady calm, solid and implacable as a mountain voice came from behind the brothers stoically soaking in the tirade. Thank you, Colonel. I believe I can take it from here. The Colonel puffed his chest and stepped between the frozen NCOs and officer, as if they weren't there, and snarled, If you think that you can get away with going easy on your sons. Major General Eric George did not scowl, or glower, or raise his voice, or puff out his chest to meet the man's challenge. He merely fixed the irate man with a steady gaze and softly said, I think of no such thing, Colonel. The Colonel wilted under that gaze, and he harumphed and turned to leave, but forgot that there was an NCO still standing at attention to his left, and so collided with Sergeant George and bounced off, harumphed again, and stalked off angrily. Johnny, Linus, if you would please follow me, General George softly ordered. It was unmistakably an order, and both of them found themselves wishing for the public reaming back. The two brothers followed the father through the stark corridors of the ship and tried to look at anything except their father's broad back, and each other except in furtive, sidelong glances in silence. Sergeant George started rehearsing his version of events and potential arguments in his head. He had a sense of foreboding that it would do him little good, but he did it anyway. Eventually they entered General George's Spartan, nearly bare office where he sat behind his desk, whose holographic display still showed the mountainous amount of work the general had to do, and commanded, Sit. They did so, drawing the collapsible chairs from the office wall and unfolding them in silent anticipation. Explain. He had me first, Captain George blurted out, sounding for all the world more like an aggrieved Johnny than an R&I officer. He went dark since Roger got killed. No calls, no emails, leaving all our texts unsent. Even Mom, she called me up and asked me to get him to call her. So I did. Sergeant George did not sound much like a non-commissioned officer of the R&I, and a lot more like a hurt and furious little brother. He didn't even bother looking at Mom's message when we got the news about Robbie. Didn't fucking bother. 3 things, General George said. First, do you believe your mother intended you to, or would appreciate your method of communication with your brother? Second, do you believe perhaps your father might have had something to say to Johnny on the subject of his long silence? Third, do you believe it is appropriate to challenge a superior officer to a fistfight in the corridors of a Republican naval vessel? Sergeant George started feeling the familiar chagrin and shame at his father's disapproval rise up within him as he answered in order, No, sir. Aye, sir. No, sir. Captain George was beginning to look a little smug until the general's eyes fell upon him. His smirk quickly dissolved. Your brother having acted wrongly doesn't make you suddenly right, Jonathan Yormdrill George. Wipe that smirk off your face before I do it for you. Aye, sir. General George stared at his oldest son for a long moment before he said, Your refusal to communicate in any capacity, other than AA reports with me, and your continued refusal to speak with your mother, living brothers, and your cousin, has put undue strain on each of them and on the family as a whole. If you, for a second, try to justify that none of us can fathom what it's like for you, recall that Robbie and Roger were my sons, just as much as they were your brothers. Grief may excuse some seclusion, but you have moved beyond seclusion and into neglect. This has led to you being ignorant of several facts concerning what members of the family are still alive. For instance, Yorvdrill has resolved to join the R&I when he is of age next year, and Pete has gone missing in action. The captain could not look more shocked, horrified, and pained if the general had hit him. I'm sorry, sir, he mumbled at the deck. You will look at me in the eye and speak clearly when you speak to me, Captain. Robbie immediately snapped his eyes up and said, Aye, sir. I have worse news. Yorvdrill accidentally received pizza if you're reading this last week, General George said, and the brothers winced as he continued. I already looked into it. The postmaster abroad the speaking softly discovered that in the rush to mobilize someone had simply bumped the envelope from the CNM slot and someone replaced it in the slot for delivery instead. Still, it must have ripped you up, Sergeant George said, through a lump in his throat. The general nodded and dismissed his work from the display, and instead fixed his older son with a steady, implacable stare. Furthermore, he said, your refusal to acknowledge anything outside the immediate concerns of your command has no side blinded you to the fact that MH is taking a long, hard look at you. If you had picked your nose up off the grindstone, you might have noticed that you have been leading combat operations for a year, and somehow did not receive a promotion with that new stack of medals. Put simply, I believe that you're in danger of being involuntarily separated from service under the mental health medical. But sir, they can't do that, Captain George balked. And why can't they do that? Because you're a grandson of a famous hero and you have a legacy to uphold? Because you're clearly being groomed for high command, maybe this command? Because you perform your duties on the field with excellence? They can and will. The general said in the same unyielding tone that brooked no response. What's more is, I would not exercise my influence to alter that course of action if I could. The Republic does not break her servicemen if she can help it, Johnny. And if we get broken anyway, she does her best to make us whole again. Captain George opened his mouth to say something, decided against it, and closed his mouth again. General George nodded solemnly and called up a hologram of the planet below. Somewhere down there, Pete's stuck, maybe hurt, and we can't do a thing for him. Instead, we use what he got us. Aye, sir, the brothers choked. Sarkor will find him, Pop, Captain George said. Of course they will, he answered. He's a George. He was ordered specifically not to die. Speaking of orders, the two of you will spend the next 3 ships aboard the Robin Williams scrubbing their heads with the smallest brushes available. But, Pop, I'm an officer, Johnny objected. You may feel that you can take liberties with me since I'm your father, but I remain the commanding officer of the Lost Boys, of which you are a member. And so you shall follow my orders. Am I understood? Aye, sir. Can't I just take a few stripes at the post instead, sir? Sergeant George sighed. His father stared at him in silence until he supplied himself. Of course not. No quick and easy way. It was worth a shot anyway. Dismissed. End of chapter. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Casper Arnholtz, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.